Hello, and welcome to What's Going On in the World in 1814. I'm your host, Philip Rains. In tonight's program, we will discuss Francis Scott Key and the history behind our country's national anthem. After leaving Washington in ruins, the British set their sights on the third largest city at that time, Baltimore, Maryland. The British were determined to attack Baltimore by both land and water. Early on September 12, 1814, General Ross's troops landed at North Point, Maryland, and pressed on to the city. Encountering American troops along the way, General Ross, who was successful in his assault on Washington, was killed by a sharpshooter. Due to the strength of the American defenses, the British decided to make camp on the battlefield and attempt another attack under the cover of darkness. All the while, the British naval force was set to attack Fort McHenry that guarded Baltimore Harbor. Early in the morning on September 13, 1814, Admiral Cochrane began his 25-hour bombardment on Fort McHenry. The scene was exactly as Key described it in his poem. Rockets flew through the air, bursting into flames as they struck the battlements. Mortars exploded, sending shrapnel everywhere. Major George Armistead, commander of Fort McHenry, and the 1,000 troops under his command returned fire to no avail because their guns could not reach the British ships. As the British ships advanced, the American guns became more and more successful, badly damaging the ships. Armistead and his troops held the fort all through the night, refusing to surrender it to the British. By dawn, the British had given up their attempt to take the city of Baltimore. At 7:30 a.m. on September 14th, Admiral Cochrane ended his bombardment and withdrew his fleet. What you just heard was the scene that inspired Francis Scott Key to write his poem. Up next, we answer the question, why was Francis Scott Key out there? Francis Scott Key was an American lawyer and poet. He was asked to bargain with the British for the release of Dr. William Beanes. Key offered evidence from wounded British soldiers praising the care given to them by Beanes to the British officers. The British agreed to release Beanes to Key, but they were forced to stay out at sea until the assault on Baltimore was over. From a neutral ship in the harbor, Key observed the attack of Fort McHenry. At the end of the bombardment, as the smoke cleared, Francis Scott Key looked to the battlements of Fort McHenry to see which flag flew above the ramparts. The American flag waved high above Fort McHenry, signaling that the British were unsuccessful in their attempt to take the fort. Seeing this, Key was inspired to write down the poem that we now call our national anthem. Upon arriving in Baltimore, Key had his poem printed on pamphlets by the Baltimore American. Originally, Key called the poem Defense of Fort McHenry. It wasn't until later that the poem written by Key was put to the tune of an old British drinking song, To Anacreon in Heaven. It wasn't until later that the song became commonly known as the Star-Spangled Banner. Although it was written in 1814 and was widely popular, it was not until 1931 that Congress made it the official national anthem of the United States. Here are some interesting facts about the so-called Star-Spangled Banner. It was made in Baltimore, Maryland from July to August 1813 by Mary Pickersgill. The flag was commissioned by Major George Armistead, the commander of Fort McHenry. The flag had 15 stars and 15 stripes and was 30 feet by 42 feet long. Now, it is 30 feet by 34 feet, with one star having been cut out. The flag was originally on loan to the Smithsonian Institution from the Armistead family in 1907. It was later converted to a permanent gift in 1912. Thank you for listening to What's Going On in the World in 1814. This broadcast is brought to you by Encyclopedia Smithsonian at www.si.edu.